Imagine walking into a debate designed to tear you down, facing a panel of hostile intellectuals, but instead of crumbling, you flip the entire conversation on its head. That's exactly what Caroline Levitt did when she faced Professor Richard Hensley at Oxford University. The Oxford Political Forum was one of the most prestigious debate events in the world, a place where renowned scholars, politicians, and public intellectuals gathered to engage in intense ideological battles. Held inside Oxford University's Great Hall, the debate stage was framed by towering bookshelves, grand chandeliers, and an audience of students, faculty members, and journalists, all eager to witness what was expected to be another intellectual dismantling of a conservative guest. At the center of the room sat Professor Richard Hensley, a well-known liberal academic and media personality who had built his reputation on eviscerating right-wing figures with sharp wit and clever rhetoric. His confidence was evident, legs crossed, fingers tapping against the polished wooden table as he waited for the night's event to unfold. He had done this many times before, effortlessly turning conservative guests into punchlines for viral soundbites. Tonight's guest, Caroline Levitt. Young, conservative, and at least in the eyes of the panelists and audience, outmatched. To them she was just another right-wing mouthpiece, someone to be toyed with and dismissed in front of an approving crowd. The panelists, a mix of progressive scholars, journalists, and student debaters, were already exchanging knowing smirks awaiting the inevitable takedown. Professor Hensley leaned forward, microphone in hand, and gave a polite but condescending smile as he prepared to set the stage for his latest intellectual conquest. What no one in the room realized was that this debate wasn't going to go the way they expected. In fact, by the time it was over, it would be Hensley, not Levitt, who struggled to find his words. Professor Richard Hensley leaned into his microphone, flashing the same practiced, condescending smile that had made him a dominant force in public debates. His voice, calm yet razor-sharp, carried through Oxford University's Great Hall, immediately commanding the room. "Caroline Levitt," he began, dragging out her name with the casual arrogance of a man who had already decided the outcome of this debate. "It's refreshing to see a young conservative willing to step into a setting like this." His words sounded polite, but the tone was anything but welcoming. The audience chuckled, sensing the setup. This was the part where he softened his opponent before dismantling them. "But let's get to the real question," Hensley continued, leaning back in his chair as if preparing for a leisurely intellectual exercise. "In a world that is moving forward, on social progress, on inclusivity, on modern economic policies, why are you so determined to cling to an ideology that, frankly, belongs in the past?" The audience erupted into scattered applause, a signal that they were already on his side. The panelists seated next to him exchanged knowing glances, some even smirking, waiting for Levitt to scramble for a defense. Hensley continued, upping the pressure. "The conservative movement has always been about preserving outdated traditions, resisting change, and rejecting modern progress. And yet here you are, a young woman, someone who benefits from the very progress conservatives have historically opposed." He paused for effect, his smile widening. "Do you see the contradiction? Or are you just here to repeat the same tired talking points?" Another wave of laughter rippled through the crowd, reinforcing his dominance over the room. The rhythm was perfect. Hensley was doing what he did best, setting his opponent up for failure. He tilted his head slightly, feigning curiosity. "Tell me, Caroline," he said, his voice thick with sarcasm, "are you here because you truly believe in these policies, or is this just a performance for a future spot on right-wing television?" A few students in the audience laughed openly. The panelists leaned forward, ready to join the attack. Hensley's smirk widened. He had done this before. He knew how this played out. What he didn't know was that this time, it wouldn't go according to plan. As Professor Hensley's opening attack landed, the panelists seized the moment, eager to pile on before Caroline Levitt could properly respond. The atmosphere in Oxford University's Great Hall shifted from an academic debate to something resembling a coordinated ambush. Dr. Eleanor Marsh, a prominent journalist and vocal progressive, leaned forward, shaking her head with a knowing smirk. "Caroline, let's be honest," she said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. Young conservatives like yourself are a rarity, and we all know why." She gestured vaguely toward the audience, earning a few chuckles. "The Republican Party has a long history of resisting diversity, yet here you are, young, articulate, camera-ready." The implication was clear. Levitt wasn't there because of her intelligence or her convictions, but because she was a convenient face for an outdated ideology. "Do you ever feel like they're just using you?" Marsh continued, crossing her arms as she delivered what she believed was a devastating, rhetorical blow. The audience responded with another round of laughter, a few students even whispering among themselves. The panelists exchanged pleased glances, sensing that the debate was already tilting in their favor. Then James Patel, an economist and frequent political commentator, jumped in. "I mean, look at your position, Caroline," he said with an easy grin. "You're here defending a party that claims to champion personal responsibility, yet consistently opposes economic programs that would actually help struggling families. So which is it? Are conservatives just blind to the realities of the modern world, or are they deliberately working against progress?" The question was meant to be a trap. If she defended conservative economic policies, the panel would attack her for ignoring income inequality. If she acknowledged flaws in the party, they would paint her as a hypocrite. Hensley, watching it all unfold, sat back in satisfaction. This was his stage, his game, and Levitt had just walked into the lion's den. The panelists weren't looking for answers. They were looking for entertainment. Hensley saw his chance to land the final blow. "Come on, Caroline," he said, flashing another smug smile. "Be honest with us. Are you actually here to have a real discussion, or are you just hoping to land a Fox News contract when this is all over?" The audience laughed louder this time, believing they were watching another conservative crumble under pressure. But Caroline Levitt didn't blink. She let the laughter die out on its own. Then, finally, she tilted her head slightly and spoke. "Are you finished?" The room shifted. For the first time all evening, the panelists looked uncertain. The laughter faded faster than expected, leaving an uneasy silence in Oxford University's Great Hall. Caroline Levitt sat still, her posture unshaken, her expression unreadable. The panel had thrown everything at her: mockery, loaded questions, carefully framed traps, but she hadn't flinched once. She let the quiet stretch just a little longer, just enough for the tension to settle into the room. Then, in a voice that was calm but cutting, she asked, "Are you finished?" Professor Richard Hensley's smirk faltered, just slightly. He hadn't expected her to take control. He had expected defensiveness, stumbling explanations, or at the very least a rush to justify her position. Instead, she wasn't playing his game at all. Levitt shifted slightly in her seat, clasped her hands together on the table, and spoke. "This is what you do," she said, her tone even, deliberate. "You set people up with smug little sound bites, get your panel to laugh, and expect your guest to shrink. Usually it works, but here's the problem. You didn't do your homework on me." The audience stiffened. The panelists, who had been so sure of their control over the conversation, exchanged uneasy glances. Even the camera operators adjusted their angles, sensing that something real was happening. Levitt leaned forward just slightly, locking eyes with Hensley. "You call me a token, a puppet. You act as if I have no agency, no independent thought, as if I'm just here to repeat whatever talking points my party gives me. But here's the irony. You're the one sticking to a script." Hensley blinked. "You accuse conservatives of resisting change, of recycling outdated ideas. But what have you done here today? The same predictable attacks, the same tired insults, the same strategy you use every time. It's not me who lacks originality, it's you." The room shifted. A few whispers broke out in the audience. The panelists were no longer smirking. The confidence that had once filled the space was gone. Levitt wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Her words cut deeper because they were controlled, precise, and undeniable. "You sit here and act like you care about young people being involved in politics," she continued. "But if they're not repeating your exact narrative, you try to discredit them. You talk about diversity, but the second someone doesn't fall in line with your worldview, you mock them. You don't want real debate. You want a controlled narrative, and when you can't control it, you panic. The audience was no longer laughing. Even the students who had entered the room expecting Levitt to falter were now sitting up, listening. Hensley cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. For the first time that evening, he was the one searching for words. Caroline Levitt had just flipped the entire debate on its head. The Oxford University Great Hall was no longer the stage for an easy intellectual victory. It was now Caroline Levitt's domain. The once boisterous energy had drained from the room, replaced by something much heavier: unease. Professor Richard Hensley, who had spent his career dominating conversations, now found himself on the other side of the equation. He opened his mouth, clearly searching for a quick-witted response, something to regain control of the room, but nothing came. Levitt had dissected his entire approach, not just in this debate but in every debate he had ever conducted. The smirks were gone. The laughter had died. The panelists, once so eager to join the attack, were now shifting in their seats, suddenly aware that their planned tactics had backfired. Levitt, seeing the hesitation in Hensley's expression, pressed forward. "See, this is the problem," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "You talk about conservatives being afraid of progress, but you don't actually want progress. You want obedience. You claim to champion critical thinking, but the second someone disagrees with you, you mock them, dismiss them, and paint them as an outsider. Is that real progress, or is it just a different kind of control?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. A few members of the audience, previously silent, nodded subtly. Others frowned, not at Levitt, but at the panelists who had once seemed so assured. Professor Hensley finally forced out a chuckle, attempting to break the silence. "Caroline," he said, "that's a very dramatic way of looking at things." Levitt didn't budge. "Is it?" she asked. "Or is it just an uncomfortable truth?" More whispers spread throughout the room. Some of the students who had arrived expecting to watch Levitt stumble were now exchanging glances, reconsidering. Hensley was used to controlling the conversation, dictating the flow of the discussion and making his guests scramble for answers. But now, he was the one scrambling. He knew it. The panelists knew it. The entire audience knew it. One of the panelists, a journalist who had eagerly joined in mocking Levitt earlier, cleared her throat and awkwardly adjusted her microphone. It was a small movement, but it signaled something monumental. They were no longer sure what to do. Levitt let that reality settle into the room. Then, with a slight, knowing smile, she sat back in her chair. The power had shifted completely. And for the first time in his career, Richard Hensley was left with nothing to say. The fallout from Caroline Levitt's debate performance was immediate and explosive. Within hours of the event, clips of her calmly dismantling Professor Richard Hensley flooded social media. Twitter, YouTube, and major news platforms lit up with reactions, many of them stunned at the unexpected power shift that had taken place in Oxford's prestigious Great Hall. Caroline Levitt just flipped the script on one of the most aggressive liberal debaters in academia and left him speechless, one viral tweet read. Others followed. Hensley thought he was setting her up for an easy takedown. Instead, she turned the entire debate against him. She didn't yell, she didn't get defensive, she just exposed their tactics, and they had no idea what to do. The moment you watch a debate panel, realize their guest is smarter than them. Even those who didn't usually follow political debates were sharing the clip, fascinated by the way Levitt had controlled the conversation. The most telling part? The moment when the panel fell silent. That pause, that realization that they had lost control of the discussion, had made the moment even more impactful. News networks jumped on the story. Conservative media outlets hailed Levitt's performance as one of the most powerful debate moments in recent memory, while even some liberal commentators were forced to acknowledge that Hensley had not come out on top. Some tried to downplay the moment, insisting that Levitt had just been skilled at deflection. But the clips told a different story. Meanwhile, Oxford University's debate organizers scrambled to address the unexpected attention. The forum, which had originally planned for a standard post-event write-up, now found itself at the center of an international discussion on media bias, fair debate, and the role of intellectual honesty in public discourse. And then Professor Hensley broke his silence. In a carefully worded tweet, he attempted damage control. Great discussion with Caroline Levitt today at Oxford. Debate is essential for democracy, and I always welcome a strong exchange of ideas. But no one was buying it. The responses were brutal. You didn't welcome the exchange, you lost control of it. This is the PR version of pretending you meant to trip? Dude, just take the L. Hensley had spent years controlling the narrative, but this time, the narrative was no longer his to control. In the days following the debate, Caroline Levitt's profile skyrocketed. What was meant to be a routine political forum at Oxford University had transformed into one of the most viral political moments of the year. News networks, podcasts, and media outlets, both conservative and neutral, began reaching out for interviews. Overnight, she had gone from a promising young commentator to a dominant force in political discourse. Meanwhile, Professor Richard Hensley was facing a very different reality. The man who had built his reputation on effortlessly dismantling conservative guests was now the subject of brutal online scrutiny. His supporters scrambled to rewrite the narrative, claiming that Levitt's moment was being overhyped, but even some of his usual allies admitted he had been outmatched. The impact wasn't just online, it was institutional. The Oxford Political Forum, once seen as a gold standard for balanced debates, found itself under intense pressure to re-examine its approach. Had it truly been a space for open discussion, or had it become a platform for ideological takedowns disguised as intellectual discourse? Hensley tried to move forward, but his next few media appearances were met with skepticism. His usual smugness no longer landed the same way. Viewers had seen him lose control once, and that changed everything. As for Levitt, she didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She simply continued to speak, to debate, and to challenge. And that was what made her victory even more powerful. The debate between Caroline Levitt and Professor Richard Hensley serves as a powerful lesson about intellectual honesty, composure, and the power of controlling a narrative. Levitt walked into a hostile environment fully aware that she was being set up to fail, yet she didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she stayed calm, called out the tactics being used against her, and forced her opponents to confront their own contradictions. The key takeaway? Mockery and pre-planned takedowns only work when the other side plays along. Hensley's strategy had always been to provoke, control the conversation, and reduce his opponents to soundbites. But when faced with someone who refused to react emotionally, his usual approach collapsed. This moment highlights an important reality in today's media-drawn world. True strength isn't in who speaks the loudest, but in who remains in control. Levitt didn't win by attacking. She won by refusing to be cornered. For anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or set up to fail, this story is a reminder. Confidence, preparation, and strategic composure can turn any disadvantage into an opportunity to redefine the conversation, and sometimes even change the game entirely.